Breathing is the one thing you never think about until you can't do it. It is the most involuntary, assumed rhythm of existence. Inhale, exhale, repeat. For 74 years, I took that rhythm for granted. I breathed in the diesel fumes and sawdust of Detroit while I built a logistics empire from a single drafty warehouse. I breathed in the crisp, pine-scented air of the Rockies on the vacations I took my late wife, Martha, on before the cancer took her. I breathed in the scent of baby powder and milk while carrying my daughter, Elena, on my shoulders at the zoo, listening to her shriek with delight at the monkeys. But now my world has shrunk. It is no longer defined by shipping lanes or boardroom tables. It is measured by the length of a clear plastic tube and the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of an oxygen concentrator. I am William Sterling. My lungs are failing, scarred by idiopathic fibrosis, turning stiff and useless inside my chest. I am a man who once commanded fleets of trucks, now commanded by a machine that plugs into the wall. But as I would soon discover, the machinery wasn't the only thing failing in this house. I lived in the guest suite of the sprawling Georgian mansion I had gifted to Elena and her husband, Greg, 5 years ago. It was supposed to be a peaceful arrangement, a transition into my twilight years. They would look after me, they said. I would enjoy the gardens I paid for, surrounded by family. But the atmosphere in the house had changed over the last 6 months. It had become heavy, thick with a resentment that coated the back of my throat like dust. Conversations stopped abruptly when I entered the room. Elena, once my little girl who used to cry if she stepped on a snail, had become sharp-edged and impatient. Her eyes, which used to light up when I walked in, now tracked me with a cold, calculating detachment. She looked at my oxygen tank not as a medical device keeping her father alive, but as an hourglass counting down to a payday she felt she was owed. The incident happened on a Tuesday. The humidity in the valley was oppressive, a wet blanket that made the air feel thick and difficult to process. My chest felt like it was wrapped in iron bands, every breath a labor, a conscious effort of will. The main concentrator, the big machine that hummed in the corner, was acting up, rattling with a loose bearing. I needed the portable tank for the night while the service technician was scheduled for the morning. Elena came in at 9 p.m. to set me up. She was wearing her silk robe, a glass of red wine in her hand. She looked beautiful, in that hard, polished way she had developed since marrying Greg. "I checked the tank, Dad," she said, her voice light and airy. She patted the metal cylinder standing next to my nightstand. "It's brand new, fresh from the delivery service this afternoon, full to the brim." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes remained flat, assessing. "Thank you, sweetheart," I wheezed, adjusting the pillows behind my back to keep my torso elevated. I trusted her implicitly. Why wouldn't I? She was my blood. She was the one who held my hand at Martha's funeral. "It's no trouble, Dad," she said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. Her lips were cold. "We just want you to be comfortable." She turned off the main light, leaving me in the soft glow of the nightlight. I heard the door click shut. I listened to her footsteps recede down the hallway, the faint clinking of her wineglass against her ring. I strapped the mask to my face. I checked the flow. It was steady. I closed my eyes, letting the hiss of the gas lull me into a fitful sleep. I woke up 2 hours later, drowning. It wasn't water filling my lungs. It was nothingness, a terrifying, absolute vacuum. I sucked in air, my diaphragm heaving, but nothing came. The flow had stopped. The hiss was gone. Panic, primal and terrifying, seized me instantly. It wasn't a rational fear. It was the lizard brain screaming that I was dying. I sat up, clawing at the mask, tearing it off my face. I gasped like a fish thrown onto a dock, my mouth opening and closing. But the air in the room felt too thin, too meager to sustain me. My chest burned. It felt like someone had poured molten lead into my bronchial tubes. The edges of my vision began to flicker with black spots. I tried to call out, to scream for Elena, but I didn't have the breath to form words. All that came out was a strangled, high-pitched wheeze. "Help!" The word died in my throat.
I flailed for the nightstand, my hand knocking into the lamp, searching desperately for the call button. My fingers brushed a glass of water. Crash. The glass shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound exploding in the silence of the room. I fell back onto the pillows, my vision tunneling. The darkness was closing in, a heavy curtain being drawn across my life. I thought of Martha. I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. The door burst open.
It wasn't Elena. It was Sarah. Sarah was the night nurse I had hired privately 3 months ago, against Greg's wishes. I didn't want to burden my children with my 3 a.m. needs. Sarah was a former Army medic, a woman of 40 with hands that were scarred and capable, and a demeanor that brooked no nonsense. She saw me thrashing on the bed, blue-lipped and terrified, clutching my throat. She didn't waste a second asking what was wrong. She didn't panic. She moved with the fluid, practiced speed of someone who had treated trauma in a combat zone. She dropped her back and lunged for the emergency backup tank she kept in the closet, the small, travel-sized one that Elena didn't know about. She ripped the seal off. She yanked the tubing from the dead tank and connected it to the new one in seconds. She cranked the flow to maximum. She pressed the mask back over my face. "Breathe, William," she commanded, her voice calm and anchoring. "Deep breaths. I've got you." Cool, sweet oxygen rushed into my nose. It hit my lungs like a lifeline. I gasped, sucking it in greedily. My chest heaved. I took another ragged breath, then another. The black spots dancing in my eyes slowed, then began to fade. The burning in my chest dulled to a throb. I lay there for a long time, just shaking, tears of pure physical relief leaking from my eyes. Sarah kept her hand on my shoulder, monitoring my pulse, watching the color return to my face. When my breathing finally leveled out to a steady rhythm, Sarah stood up. Her face was grim. She walked over to the large tank Elena had set up. She spun the valve. Nothing. She checked the gauge. She capped it with her fingernail to make sure the needle wasn't stuck. She turned back to me. Her face was pale, her jaw set hard. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah whispered, the anger vibrating in her voice. "This tank is empty. It's bone dry." I pulled the mask down, my hand trembling violently. I gasped, my voice a broken croak. "Elena." She checked it. She said, "Full." Sarah looked at me. Then she looked at the bedroom door, as if expecting the executioner to walk back in. "Sir," she said, leaning close, "a tank doesn't empty itself in 2 hours. Not unless there's a massive leak, and I would hear that. I would smell it. This tank was empty when she hooked it up, and a gauge doesn't lie. If she checked it, she saw the needle on 0.
If you have ever stared at the ceiling in the middle of the night, realizing that the person sleeping down the hall, the person you raised, the person whose scraped knees you bandaged, just tried to kill you by holding back the very air you breathe, you know the cold horror that settled in my gut. It is a chill that no blanket can warm. Subscribe now, because I decided right then that if she wanted to cut off my supply, I would show her what it really means to suffocate. "Wake them," I whispered, the rage starting to burn through the fear. Sarah shook her head. "No, not yet. If we call the police now, she'll say it was an accident. She'll say she misread the gauge. She'll say she grabbed the wrong tank by mistake. She'll play the distraught daughter, and without proof of intent, they'll believe her." She was right. I knew she was right. Elena was a master manipulator. She could cry on cue. She could spin a narrative that made her the victim of a tragic oversight. I asked. "We wait," Sarah said. "We let them think it was a close call." The realization was a physical blow, harder than the lack of air had been. Elena hadn't made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. A mistake is leaving the lights on. Giving your father an empty oxygen tank when his lungs are failing is a calculated gamble on his death. It is an assassination attempt disguised as care. For the next week, I played the part of the frail, declining invalid. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I told her my memory was getting foggy, that the lack of oxygen must have damaged my brain. I watched her reaction closely. She didn't look guilty, she looked disappointed. And then I saw it, a flicker of predatory hope in her eyes. I saw her texting Greg across the dinner table while I struggled to lift my fork. I saw the way they whispered in the kitchen, stopping abruptly when I shuffled in. I needed proof. I needed to catch the intent. I needed to hear them say it.
I had Sarah install a tiny motion-activated camera hidden in the dense foliage of the artificial ficus plant on my dresser. It was pointed directly at the oxygen station. If anyone tampered with the equipment again, I would see it. But visual proof wasn't enough. I needed the why. I placed a high-fidelity voice recorder, activated by sound, taped securely to the underside of the dining room table.
3 days later, Sarah brought her laptop into my room while Elena was out at her Pilates class. We sat on the bed, sharing a pair of headphones. I pressed play. The audio was crisp. I heard the clink of wine glasses. I heard Greg sigh. "The loan sharks are giving us until the 1st, Greg," Elena's voice hissed. It was a sound I had never heard from her. Venomous, desperate, ugly. "We need the insurance payout. We need the inheritance. Dad is taking too long. He's lingering." My heart broke. It shattered into dust. Cockroach. That was what I was to her. Not a father. Not a provider. A pest. "The empty tank didn't work, Greg," Greg replied, his voice shaking with anxiety. "That nurse is too quick. She was in there within seconds. We need to get rid of her first." "I know," Elena said. I could hear the smile in her voice. "I'll fire her on Friday. I'll plant some of the silver in her bag. I'll say she was stealing. I'll threaten to call the cops so she leaves quietly. Then it's just us, and accidents happen when there's no professional supervision." I took off the headphones. My hands were trembling, but not from weakness. The grief I felt was being cauterized by a white-hot fury. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively expediting the process. They were planning to ruin a good woman's career and life just to get me alone so they could finish the job. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. She gripped my hand, her strength flowing into me. "They're firing you on Friday," I said, my voice steel. It didn't waver. The wheeze was gone, replaced by the deep, resonant tone I used to use in boardrooms when I was about to crush a competitor. 2 days, Sarah said. 2 days, I repeated. 2 days to rewrite the will. I looked at the oxygen tank, the full one, humming beside me. "And to plan a party," I added. "I think it's time we celebrated my recovery with a family dinner. I want everyone at the table. I want the finest wine." I reached for my phone. "Call my lawyer, Sarah. And then call your friends in the department." The game had changed. They thought they were hunting a sick, helpless animal. They didn't realize they had just walked into the cage of a lion who was finally, fully awake. Friday arrived not with the warmth of the morning sun, but with the cold, metallic weight of a guillotine blade waiting to drop. I sat in my wingback chair by the window, the nasal cannula itching slightly against my upper lip, watching the drama unfold in the driveway. It was a performance, a piece of theater directed by my daughter, Elena, and she was playing the lead role with a terrifying amount of enthusiasm. She was humming. That was the detail that turned my stomach. She was humming a light, airy tune as she orchestrated the destruction of a good woman's livelihood. Sarah, my nurse, was standing by her car, her posture rigid, her face a mask of controlled fury. Elena was standing on the porch, holding a silver Ziploc bag high in the air like a trophy. Inside, glinting in the sunlight, were 3 antique silver spoons, part of the wedding set Martha and I had received 50 years ago. "Elena!" Elena's voice carried through the glass, shrill and performative, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Don't try to deny it." I watched Sarah. I knew the script. We had rehearsed this silence. She didn't scream back. She didn't fight. She simply snatched her bag from the ground, looked up at my window for a fraction of a second, and gave a barely perceptible nod, a wink, a signal. Then she got into her car and drove away. To Elena, that car driving away was victory. It was the removal of the last obstacle. It was the clearing of the board. To me, it was the bait being taken. Elena stormed back into the house, slamming the door. A moment later, she burst into my room, her face flushed with the exertion of her lie. She exclaimed, pressing a hand to her chest, feigning distress. "Can you believe it? Sarah, stealing from us, after everything we paid her. I had to let her go immediately." I looked at her. I looked at the daughter who used to cry when she stepped on a snail. Now she ruined lives before breakfast and hummed while doing it.
"Oh no," I rasped, letting my voice tremble, playing the confused, frightened old man they needed me to be. "Sarah, she seems so nice. What will I do tonight?" Elena sat on the edge of the bed, patting my knee. Her touch felt like ice. "Don't worry, Daddy. Greg and I are here. We'll take care of the night shift. It's just us family now." "Just family?" I repeated, closing my eyes to hide the disgust burning in them. "Yes." The rest of the day was an agonizing exercise in patience. The house felt cavernous and hostile.
Without Sarah's steady presence, the silence amplified every creak of the floorboards, every whisper between Elena and Greg in the hallway. I sat in my room, listening to the rhythmic whoosh, hiss of the oxygen concentrator, measuring my life in liters per minute. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was a helpless invalid, tethered to the wall, waiting for them to decide when to pull the plug. They didn't know that 3 blocks away, parked in a nondescript utility van, Sarah was watching a live feed from the camera hidden in my ficus plant. Next to her was Mr. Henderson, my lawyer of 30 years, a man who looked like a friendly grandfather, but litigated like a shark, and 2 off-duty police officers I had hired as private security. We were all just waiting for the curtain to rise. Evening fell, bringing with it a suffocating tension. The air in the house felt heavy, charged with static. "We're having a special dinner tonight, Dad," Elena chirped, bustling into my room at 6:30 p.m. She was dressed up, wearing pearls and a dress she usually saved for country club dinners. "Greg made your favorite, pot roast, and we have some papers for you to look at." "Pot roast," I said, managing a weak smile. "That sounds—" She adjusted my nasal cannula, her fingers lingering near the tubing for a second too long. "Come on." The dining room was dimly lit, candles flickering in the center of the long mahogany table I had bought in Italy. It was a setting for a celebration, but it felt like a wake. Greg was already seated, pouring a bottle of heavy red wine. His hand was shaking. He spilled a drop on the tablecloth and scrubbed at it fiercely with his napkin, avoiding my eyes. Greg was the weak link. I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. He wasn't made for murder. He was made for mediocrity. Elena was the engine behind this. I sat at the head of the table, the portable oxygen unit humming beside my chair like a faithful dog. "Here we go," Elena said, placing a plate in front of me. The meat was tender, the gravy rich, but to me it smelled like ash. "Eat up, Dad." We ate in silence for 10 minutes. The only sounds were the scraping of silverware and the hiss click of my breathing machine. Elena watched me eat, her gaze flickering repeatedly to the machine, then to Greg, then back to me. She was impatient. The predator was tired of playing with the food. "So, Dad," Greg started, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat and took a massive gulp of wine. He reached under the table and pulled out a blue folder. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. "About the estate management." "The accountant," I repeated, wiping my mouth. "Yes," Elena interjected smoothly. "With Sarah Gran and your health fluctuating, we think it's time you signed over full, durable power of attorney, including the medical directives, just to make things easier for you, so you don't have to worry about bills or decisions," I said. Elena froze for a microsecond, but recovered instantly. "Exactly. You seemed so confused the other night. You panicked." I looked at the document. I put on my reading glasses, my hands shaking with a tremor I no longer had to fake, though now it was born of adrenaline, not frailty. I read the text. It wasn't just management. It was a total surrender. It gave them immediate access to the liquid assets. It gave them the power to move me to a facility. It gave them the power to issue do not resuscitate orders. It was a death warrant disguised as legal jargon. "I see," I said softly. "We just want to help," Greg said, his eyes darting around the room. "I appreciate that," I said. "I really do." Elena frowned. "What document?" "I have my ways," I said. I reached into the pocket of my wool cardigan. I bypassed the tissue I kept there. My fingers closed around a single folded sheet of stiff photo paper. I pulled it out. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately smoothing the crease against the table. I slid it across the mahogany, past the gravy boat, past the wine bottle, until it rested directly in front of Elena. "What is it?" she asked, annoyed. She picked it up. She squinted at it in the candlelight. It was a high-resolution printout of a screenshot. It was grainy,
taken from a hidden lens, but the image was unmistakable. It showed a woman in a silk robe standing over an oxygen tank. Her hand was on the regulator valve. The digital clock in the corner of the image read Tuesday, 8:45 p.m. Elena went still, absolute statue still. The color didn't just drain from her face, it vanished, leaving her skin the translucent shade of old parchment. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "What is it?" Greg asked, leaning over. He saw the picture. He made a choking sound and knocked his wineglass over. The red liquid spread across the table like a bloodstain, dripping onto the floor, but neither of them moved to clean it up.
Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. That, I said, my voice gaining strength, projecting from the diaphragm I had spent days exercising in secret, is you, Elena. Tuesday night, 15 minutes before you told me the tank was full. You aren't checking the gauge. You aren't dusting it. I leaned forward. The frailty was gone. The confusion was gone. I looked at her with the eyes of the man who had negotiated contracts with union bosses and survived hostile takeovers. Greg stood up so fast his chair toppled backward with a crash. "This is insane. You're senile. You don't know what you're seeing. That's—" "I know exactly what I'm seeing," I said calmly. "I'm seeing attempted murder, first degree." Elena screeched, crumbling the photo in her hand. "It's just a picture." "You're right," I said. "A picture is open to interpretation. But a voice?" I reached into my lap and picked up the small remote control I had taped to my thigh. I pointed it at the high-end Bluetooth speaker system sitting on the sideboard, the one Greg used to play his jazz music. I pressed play. The room filled with sound. It wasn't jazz. It was the hollow, echoing audio recorded from under this very table 3 nights ago. "The loan sharks are giving us until the first, Greg," Elena's voice hissed through the speakers, magnified, undeniable. "We need the insurance payout. Dad is taking too long." Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "The empty tank didn't work," Greg's recorded voice replied, trembling. "That nurse is too quick. I'll fire her on Friday," the recording continued. "Then it's just us." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Elena dropped the crumpled photo. She looked at me, and the mask of the caring daughter didn't just slip, it dissolved in acid. Her face twisted into a snarl of pure animalistic desperation. Her eyes were wide, manic, terrifying. "Money?" she screamed. She slammed her hands onto the table, making the silverware jump. "Fools!" she shrieked, spit flying from her mouth. "Millions! And we're drowning! We're losing the house! Greg is in debt to dangerous people, and you're just sitting here, breathing, taking up space! You owe us! You lived your life!" Greg yelled, looking at the windows, terrified. "Die!" she screamed. She looked at the oxygen machine humming beside me, the machine that was keeping me alive, the machine she had tried to weaponize. "I'm done waiting," she growled. She lunged.
She moved faster than I thought possible. She scrambled over the corner of the table, knocking the centerpiece to the floor, and grabbed the clear plastic tubing connecting my nose to the machine. She yelled, yanking on it. The mask tore from my face. My head snapped back. I couldn't breathe. The sudden lack of airflow hit me, but this time I wasn't terrified. I was ready. "Do it," I challenged her, my voice a wheeze, looking her dead in the eye. "Cut the line," she screamed, wrapping the cord around her hand to rip it from the machine. Boom! The front door didn't just open, it exploded inward. The heavy oak slammed against the wall with a violence that shook the chandelier above us. "Police!" Sarah walked in first. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing a dark jacket, flanked by Mr. Henderson and the 2 officers, their weapons drawn and leveled. "Stop," she ordered. Her voice wasn't the gentle tone of a nurse. It was the command of a soldier. Elena froze. Her hand was still wrapped around my oxygen tube. She looked at the door. She looked at the guns. She looked at Greg, who was cowering against the sideboard, weeping with his hands over his head. "Mr. Sterling," the leading officer said, stepping into the dining room, his eyes fixed on Elena. "We heard the recording live. We have the video feed." Elena's grip on the tube loosened. It fell from her hand, swinging back and forth like a pendulum. She looked at me. The rage vanished, replaced instantly by a pathetic, frantic panic. She started to sob, ugly, heaving sounds of a child caught in a lie she couldn't charm her way out of. "He made me do it," she wailed, pointing a shaking finger at her husband. "He has gambling debts.
He said they would kill us if we didn't get the money. I was scared. Greg shouted, jumping up. You liar! It was your idea. She wanted the jewelry. She wanted the house. She said he was a burden. Officer, she bought the empty tank. They turned on each other instantly. The united front crumbled into dust. They were tearing at each other's throats like starving wolves in a trap. It was pathetic. It was visceral. It was heartbreaking. I watched as the officers moved in. I watched the handcuffs click on my daughter's wrists, the same wrists I had held when she learned to walk. I watched her being read her rights for attempted murder and conspiracy against her own father. As they dragged her out, kicking and screaming, she twisted her head back to look at me.
She begged, mascara running down her face. Dad, tell them, I'm your daughter. I'm your little girl. I looked at her. I reached down and picked up the oxygen mask. I strapped it back onto my face. I took a deep, deliberate breath. The air flowed steady and pure, filling my lungs, clearing the fog. My daughter died the night she tried to steal my breath, I said softly. My voice was muffled by the mask, but she heard me. The officers hauled her out. Greg followed, blubbering and begging for a deal. The door closed. The sirens wailed outside, fading into the distance. The house fell quiet. A profound, ringing silence settled over the dining room, broken only by the hum of my machine. Mr. Henderson sat down in Greg's empty chair. He looked tired. I am, I said. I reached over and flipped the switch on the concentrator. The humming stopped. The room fell into total silence. Sarah? I said. I'm here, William, she said, stepping to my side. Bring me the portable unit, I said. She asked, checking my pulse. Outside, I said. I want to sit on the porch. I want to breathe fresh air. The air in here. Mr. Henderson asked. And then, tomorrow, I want you to list this house, I said. Sell it, burn it, I don't care. I'm donating the proceeds to the Long Association. Every single cent. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I stood on my own. I walked out onto the porch, leaning heavily on Sarah's arm. The night air was cool and crisp. It smelled of rain and wet earth. I took a breath, a real breath. It didn't taste like betrayal anymore. It didn't taste like fear. It tasted like survival. I looked out at the dark driveway where the police cars had just left. I had cut off their supply, and for the first time in 5 years, I could finally breathe.